If you've ever owned the 5th generation 64-bit box of tricks known as the Nintendo 64, you'll probably be aware that there are quite a few good games on it. Despite losing traction in the console wars against Sony's upstart PlayStation, Nintendo was still firing on all cylinders for their chunky cartridge-based beast with its wacky controller and playful color options, revolutionizing 3D gaming and dragging existing franchises kicking and screaming into the modern age. In fact, such was Nintendo's mastery of this generation that third-party titles on this list are somewhat rare. See what I did there? In celebration of the Nintendo 64's wonderful library of low-poly legends, we've taken it upon ourselves to trawl through Metacritic and GameRankings and present to you the 10 most highly rated N64 games. And where the scores are different, we've gone with the highest because we're just feeling very positive today. I'm the Rumble Pack-compatible Ben from TripleJump, and here are the 10 best games for the Nintendo 64. Number 10. Wave Race 64, 92%. We're starting off with a splash for this video. Wave Race 64, with its azure skies, deep blue seas, and fast-paced watery action, invited players to ditch the greyness and drudgery of everyday life and embark on a jet ski-fueled vacation across various seaside locales. The game features championship, time trial, and stunt modes, as well as multiplayer, and across all of these modes, players are treated to a light-hearted, arcadey experience with impressive physics and enjoyable handling. Nintendo went hard with the holiday vibes, with jaunty music, clear waters, and a warm-up mode where players are encouraged to follow that dolphin. Reviewers were suitably impressed and found themselves engaged by the smooth handling, location variety, and impressive visuals for the time. A few complaints were leveled at the cheesy music, and some found the announcer a little grating, but others argued that these were all part of that seaside arcade charm. Wave Race 64 is one of 3 games with a 92% average on our list, but ended up sinking slightly thanks to its 8.2 Metacritic user score. Don't let that stop you from dipping a toe into its crystal blue waters though, unless you're racing on Glacier Coast. Bit chilly that one. Number 9. Conker's Bad Fur Day, 92%. Out of the ocean and into the gutter now, as the next game on this list comes from Nintendo's staunchest ally of the era, Rare, and represents them lashing out against the cutesy kid-friendly Nintendo image and attempting to appeal to the naughtier side of the N64 fanbase. Conker's Bad Fur Day beats Wave Race 64 out thanks to its higher user score, and famously started life as another platformer featuring an adorable animal mascot character. Sometime between when this early gameplay was created and the final release of the game, fluffy squirrel friend Conker discovered drinking, greed, curse words, and all manner of debauchery, along with the cynicism and hangovers that are sure to follow. The infamously adult adventure that resulted was adored by reviewers as, thanks to Rare's proven expertise at crafting fantastic gaming experiences, Conker's Bad Fur Day was as tightly designed and expertly paced as it was crude. It was a risky move though, smearing squirrel sick and cow poop all over Nintendo's family-friendly name, and Conker's Bad Fur Day was not a commercial success. It's a shame, but we can all be happy in the knowledge that the foul-mouthed squirrel's filthy antics will live on forever in gaming infamy. It's what he would have wanted. Number 8. Banjo-Kazooie, 92%. Coming top of the pile of the 92% rated titles is Banjo-Kazooie, an example of Rare's more wholesome side. Released during an era when the British developer could practically do no wrong, Banjo-Kazooie introduces friendly bear Banjo and feisty bird pal Kazooie and sends them on an adventure to rescue Banjo's sister from the jealous witch Gruntilda. Banjo-Kazooie was developed during the early days of the 3D character platformer and innovated on the trailblazing foundations laid by Super Mario 64 to create a truly beloved adventure. The bear and bird combination allowed the developers to expand on the 3D movement and platforming gameplay in ingenious ways, and those talented artists and designers at Rare's studios dreamed up some iconic stages that were a joy to explore. Some reviewers at the time thought that Rare were just riffing on Super Mario 64's systems, which probably explains its lower score, but many retrospective onlookers are of the opinion that Rare improved greatly on the formula and believe that Banjo-Kazooie has aged far better as a result. Whatever your opinion, however, I think we can all agree that the plumber went on to bigger and better things, whereas Banjo-Kazooie is still the highlight of the bear and bird pairing's careers. Sorry Nuts and Bolts fans. Number 7. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, 92.4%. Be very quiet, viewers, because what you're looking at right now is a rarity, and I don't want you to scare it off. That's right, this is the only game on the list that wasn't developed by Nintendo or Rare. It's easy to forget that such things exist, but third parties did actually make games for the Nintendo 64, and some of them were excellent. This one is called Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and it still stands up as one of the greatest pure gameplay experiences in gaming. Oh no, I've scared it off. Has anyone got a net? Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was the first in the legendary skateboarding series and allows players to choose from a number of skateboarding heroes, including the skater boy Birdman himself, and then take to slopes, half-pipes, and rails of various urban environments, racking up scores by kick-flipping and ollieing as if your very life depended on it. The Nintendo 64 version, ported from the PS1 original by Edge of Reality, was somewhat truncated and the music tracks shortened, looped, and stripped of their vocals, and the FMV videos and blood effects removed, but none of this stops Tony's first outing from being a top-quality N64 experience that grinds its way directly into the console's top 10, blasting ska music and engaging in petty acts of vandalism along the way. Number 6. Paper Mario. 93%. At some point preceding our number 6 title's 2000 release, the high-ups at Nintendo had a meeting where someone said, "What if Mario, but paper?" Everyone agreed that this was a good idea, and the result was the rather excellent Paper Mario. Paper Mario wasn't the first time Nintendo's mascot showed up in a turn-based RPG, with Super Mario RPG The Legend of the Seven Stars appearing on the SNES in 1996. That game was developed by Square, and Nintendo reportedly approached the prolific RPG merchants for Paper Mario too. Square were too busy with some side project known as Final Fantasy VII, so Nintendo got Intelligent Systems in on the action, and the rest is papery history. The game takes place in a flattened mushroom kingdom and presents a turn-based RPG adventure for players to fold themselves into, meeting delightful characters and exploring a variety of exciting locations along the way. Reviewers praised the game's combat system, simple but fun puzzles and writing, and lauded it as the best RPG on the N64. Admittedly, this wasn't saying much, but Paper Mario capably scratched that RPG itch for Nintendo fans looking on with envy at Final Fantasy flaunting PS1 owners. Your RPG may have cool mercenaries and an epic sweeping emotional story, but does it have paper Goombas? No, didn't think so. Number 5. Super Mario 64. 94%. Did you know that, according to the Super Mario Wiki, the 64th game in the expanded Super Mario universe was not Super Mario 64, but All Night Nippon Super Mario Bros. For the NES Disk System, with Super Mario 64 being the 145th plumber-related title. He gets around, does our Mario? Meaningless stats aside, Super Mario 64 is Mario's first foray into the 3D world and is one of the most important games in the history of the medium. In a time when 3D gaming was clearly the future but developers were still getting to grips with those pesky polygons, Nintendo provided a guiding star on how to get it right, with graphical fidelity, intuitive movement, and open-ended gameplay the likes of which had never been seen before. Reviewers heaped praise on the game's innovations, controls, long-lasting gameplay, and visual resplendency, and consumers lapped it up, with Super Mario 64 living in the hearts of countless Nintendo fans who were old enough to have been around for its industry-altering debut. Despite still being incredibly popular with nostalgic gamers and speedrunners, Super Mario 64 is showing its age in certain aspects, but Nintendo's genius when it came to transplanting their icon into a 3D world was absolutely unmatched. Just think, it could have looked like this. Number 4. The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. 95%. A lot has been made of the Legend of Zelda franchise's creepier, darker side, but no Zelda title delves more deeply into the darkness than The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Not even the edgy one with the wolf. Majora's Mask is Zelda at its most unsettling, evoking the eerie side of fairy tales and fables like nothing else, and the whole thing is watched over by the most sinister celestial body outside of Dead Space's Brethren Moons. Actually, no, this one's much more sinister. Set directly after the events of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, kind of, it's complicated. Majora's Mask tells a somber tale of lost children and transformations, all set in Termina, a darker, alternate Hyrule. As well as engaging in the usual combat and puzzle solving, players have to deal with a time loop situation where Link must save the world from calamity within a strict 3-day period that can be restarted using the Song of Time. Despite the gameplay upheaval, reviewers and consumers were eager to engage, and Majora's Mask has lived on in legend for its innovative mechanics and odd, spooky tone. Okay, can we move on to the next game now? That celestial stare is actually really starting to give me the shivers. Number 3. GoldenEye 007, 96%. From red-rimmed moon eyes to GoldenEye now, as we discuss the Nintendo 64 game that took the reputation of film tie-in movies for being uninspired rush jobs and turned it completely on its head. Developed by Rare, GoldenEye 007 was released in 1997 and is based on the 1995 hit James Bond movie GoldenEye. It enables players to step into the dapper shoes of the UK's most unsecret secret agent and gives them access to a handful of snazzy gadgets and an armory of high-tech weaponry. Oh, and the Clob. Reportedly initially conceived as an on-rails shooter similar to Virtua Cop, GoldenEye 007 instead became an industry-changing first-person shooter that proved that the genre could thrive on consoles, paving the way for countless legendary FPS games to follow. Reviewers heaped particular praise on the varied and frantic multiplayer modes and lauded GoldenEye 007 as one of the best movie tie-ins ever. The game resonated even more with the consumer, as GoldenEye 007 sold incredibly well and was a mainstay of 90s split-screen gaming sessions in poster-festooned bedrooms the world over, and despite getting something of a reputation for being dated today, it's still a lot of fun once you've got your head around the old-fashioned controls. Speaking of heads, why not activate Big Head mode for added absurdity? Classic. Number 2. Perfect Dark, 97%. Following their FPS success with GoldenEye 007, Rare dropped Pierce Brosnan, probably because of his weirdly stretched mouth, in favor of their own homegrown super agent, Joanna Dark. Despite not featuring Mr. Bond, Perfect Dark is a spiritual successor to GoldenEye 007 in many ways, as it was built using an upgraded version of the same engine and maintains the sleek, spy-centric action, mission parameters that change depending on the chosen difficulty level, and classic Rare style. Perfect Dark's campaign tells a sci-fi story of intrigue and clandestine wars between alien races, with Miss Dark, a super agent working for the Carrington Institute, right there in the middle thanks to her incredible scores in training, hence the perfect nickname. The game also features that all-important multiplayer and expands on the gameplay found in GoldenEye 007 by adding options to include AI-controlled bots and mixing in Capture the Flag and King of the Hill modes. Reviewers were once again enamored with Rare's game crafting prowess and slapped even higher scores on this one than they did its predecessor, particularly praising the visuals and the multiplayer options and almost cementing Perfect Dark's legacy as the closest thing the N64 has to a perfect game. Almost, but not quite. Number 1. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, 99%. Go on then, hands up, who saw this coming? I bet you were expecting Buck Bumble, right? I know I was. Seriously though, what is there left to say about The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time that hasn't been said already? Despite the Legend of Zelda franchise maintaining an incredible level of quality and arguably going from strength to strength since Ocarina of Time's release, Link's first 3D outing has an unquestionable magic to it that stirred the adventurous spirits of so many young gamers and sees it sitting very happily at the top of the Metacritic pile as the greatest game of all time. Whether you agree with this ranking or not, Ocarina of Time's quality is undeniable and represents Nintendo transplanting yet another of their franchises into the 3D realm with unmatched proficiency. Ambitious, atmospheric, experimental, and with a soundtrack that will live on through the ages, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is a landmark piece of media and a classic video game of the very highest level. Unless you're stuck in the Water Temple, then it's an absurd mess of incompetent and clunky game design that'll have you biting your controller in frustration. Buck Bumble doesn't have a water temple, that's all I'm saying.